Well, good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, excuse me, my name is Ana Maria Chambers, and I'm the director of the Center for Publishing at the New York University School of Continuing and Professional Studies. Your host for the latest in the NYU Media Talk series, a panel discussion entitled From the Publisher's Perspective. I'm so pleased to see so many of our students here today, as well as our alumni and members of our faculty and advisory board, and all of our friends and our colleagues in the publishing industry. And I'm very pleased to welcome and to introduce to you our distinguished panelists here today. For full bios, please may I refer you to the programs here on your seats. Now, our moderator today is Michael Cader. Michael is the founder of Publishers Lunch, the largest circulation book publishing industry publication in the world. Do I have that right? Sort of. Right. As well as the companion website, publishersmarketplace.com. Now, as many of you know, Michael has also begun running a series of international publishing conferences lately entitled Publishers Launch Conferences, and in fact, the Center for Publishing sponsored one in September on ebooks at the Kimmel Center. And Michael ran a few more conferences at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and I think he's off to San Francisco soon for another conference. So, Michael, we're very happy to have you in New York here with us today. Now, next to Michael, we have Brian Tart. Brian is the president and the publisher of Dutton, an imprint of Penguin Group USA. Now, for all of you editorial assistants in the audience, I have good news. Brian himself started as an editorial assistant many years ago at Bantam Books, and so there is hope. He quickly, when moving to Dutton, he rose up the ranks, and today he publishes a wonderful line of books, including bestsellers by Harlan Coben, by Elizabeth George, and by Ken Follett. Now, next to Brian, we have Ana Maria Allessi. Ana Maria is the vice president and the publisher of Harper Media, now a division of HarperCollins. Now, as some of you may notice, Ana Maria looks nothing like Jonathan Burnham, who was initially on our program here today, and was Jonathan was called unexpectedly to London on family business, and Ana Maria very graciously stepped in his place. So, Ana Maria, we are very, very grateful to you. Ana Maria is the point person for all things digital at Harper Trade and Harper Children's, and she is our resident expert on ebooks on our panel here today. Now, next to Ana Maria, we have Bob Miller. Bob is the group publisher of Workman Publishing, where he works on a wonderful array of largely nonfiction and specialty books and calendars. And Bob was well known in the industry for not only his publishing acumen, but his willingness to try some new business models. He was the publisher of the experimental imprint Harper Studio, and was the founder and the president of Disney's Hyperion Books, where he published many bestsellers, including books by Oprah Winfrey and Mitch Albom. Now, last but not least, certainly, is Sarah Crichton. Sarah is a publisher of her own eponymous imprint, Sarah Crichton Books, at Farrar, Straus and Giroux, where she presides over a very cultivated and cultured list of fiction and nonfiction, including a number of bestsellers. Now, Sarah has a very interesting background on our panel here today, in that she's worked not only in the book industry, but in the magazine industry as a very top-level editor at Newsweek, and I think also at 17 years ago. And I might note that as editor-in-chief of Little Brown, Sarah acquired two of my favorite books, Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point and Alice Sebold's The Lovely Bones. Well, as you can see, our panelists tonight have very different backgrounds, and I'd like to share with you just a few words about how this discussion today came about. Now, those of you who've attended our previous Media Talk series know that they're very lively public forums on important issues facing our media today. Now, as we began to talk about this Media Talk, it occurred to us that many of the top leaders and the thinkers in the book publishing industry are right here on our own faculty. So why not ask them to share their individual and collective wisdom about where the industry is going and how it impacts all of you. Brian, Sarah, and Bob all teach different sections of our Introduction to Book Publishing course in the Master of Science in Publishing program, and Ana Maria teaches a course on ebooks in our continuing education program. Now, as our students can attest, they really all have much to share about the changes and the challenges our industry is facing, and I can tell you that they have all greatly enriched our classrooms. Now, for the sake of brevity, if any of you want some specific information about our programs here at the Center for Publishing, our Master of Science in Publishing, or our Summer Publishing Institute, there are programs at the back of the room. And now I think it's time to get started. We will have time for a question and answer session at the end, so please, we hope you have lots of great questions ready. And now, everybody, it's time to hear about the industry from the publisher's perspective.
Great. Are these on now? There we go. Thank you, Andrea. And thanks for making all the introductions, so I don't have to make any of them. So we can just jump right in here, which is always the most fun way to go about this. I'm going to start with a question that's going to be open to all of you. Maybe Sarah will start down at your end and work your way back to me. I've been struck with regularity over at the Publishers Lunch News Desk. Pretty much every day we get to hear from some group of people from outside of the publishing business who have a fabulous idea for reinventing publishing and come with 3 venture capitalists in tow and grand plans. So I'm wondering, I'd like to hear from all of you about how you or your companies are working to reinvent publishing from where you sit.
Oh, God, that is just that. I don't have a clue.
That's a satisfactory answer, too.
Yeah, I think, I teach my students that they have to, that the first class that I teach, we start with Gutenberg. And basically to show that publishing has been changing for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's got to keep changing, and then you have to stay nimble and adaptable and open-minded, and especially as you get to be my age, you have to surround yourself by young student-age people with new and fresh ideas and stay open to them, which then allows me to just pretend to be nimble and pretend to be adaptable. And I just stay really good at what I'm good at. And I figured that if I keep doing that, which is, in my case, picking interesting and terrific books that people are going to love, they're going to love it in whatever format comes along, which means I have to stay really at the top of my game in terms of editing and looking for talent, and also always seeing how the world is changing and looking for the potential audiences wherever one may find them. But in terms of actually changing the industry, I let other people do that.
I think one of the hardest things for all of us is that we have to keep being good at all the things we have tried to learn how to be good at over the past, 30-some years for me, but and then add all of these new skills. The nice thing about the classes here are that the people who are going to bring those new skills in a way really beyond what the rest of us up here can pretend we have are in these classes. But it is like you have to keep doing, you can't stop doing all the things that we always learned how to do. So picking the best book, making sure it has the right gestation period, building, communicating it, publishing it, making it public in every possible direction you can. Of course, now there's a lot more directions, a lot more ways you have to do it. So there's learning new skills and unfortunately investing in a new format for every place it goes. I mean, the idea that we're all nostalgic for just the old days when we could just print a book and that same object would be go in all the possible places it could go. Now we do that, and on top of that, we have to mix a little HTML5 with a EPUB 3 and a little Merlot and try to figure out where to port it. So the addition of all these new skills, which requires new staff and new abilities, is I think the hardest thing about what we're facing of all.
Yeah, I would agree that it's important to continue to do what you're good at, to stay at each individual's, predominant skill set and to maximize that. And to quote one of my favorite authors who just recently published a book called Great by Choice, Jim Collins, who for the first time agreed to publish his book simultaneously in print and in ebook. He was very reluctant to do so until this year. He talks about firing bullets, not cannonballs. And the idea being that you take small steps towards experimentation and you watch closely what that result is before you take a big, bold bet on anything. And I feel that that's a lot of what I and my group and the company that I work for is trying to do, is trying to take some very calculated, educated, small bets, watch them closely, and then understand where to apply resources. Because I don't think that our industry is suffering from a lack of ideas in any way. I think that we all have numerous very good ideas with the same limited amount of resources to apply to those ideas. So how we choose to fund and support and execute those ideas is as important as any given idea.
Yeah, I think when we first started in the business, and you learn it through kind of a mentorship program. It was like it was an apprenticeship in a lot of ways, and over the years you learned how to do things to be successful. But in publishing, particularly in the editorial side, where I came from, and I think Sarah and Bob came from as well, you learn how to fail really quickly because that's what happens with a lot of books. They actually don't work. They don't, make enough money, and you find out that, you've got to be good at that. You have to learn from that, and if you don't, you're kind of out of the business pretty quickly. And so we all learned a lot from failures, and now in the last couple of years, we're finding all sorts of new failures that we have to get used to. And that comes through experimentation, and that's exactly what all of us are doing a lot of, and more of in the last 3 or 4 years than probably in the last 15 or 20 years, at least in my career. We're just trying a lot of different things, and many of them aren't really working necessarily the first time around. And you have to decide, are you going to stick with it and make it work, or are you going to move on to the next thing? And there's a certain amount of expertise that comes out of that. And for most people, I think that's really invigorating. After 20 years of doing the same thing over and over again, you start looking around and thinking, maybe there's something else out there I should be thinking about. But we don't have to do that because everything has changed around us so dramatically, and we're all learning how to do it in a new way and how to be successful at it. And one of the ways is to continue to experiment and figure things out and to learn from it ourselves. And that's what a great deal of, I think, all of us are doing right now.
Since you've opened the door, Brian, can you think of any particular recent failure that did have educational value or that led to doing something better the next time around, just to make it a little more particular?
Well, when I was told I'd have to talk about a big mistake or failure, I conveniently thought of one I did 15 years ago.
Okay.
And I thought, that can't come back to haunt me if I did it 15 years ago. A recent one, the most recent one that I can honestly say is I got excited about the aspect of ebooks where, like enhanced ebooks, where people would want to read a book and also see a video. And I put a lot of money into one project where I thought it would be really cool if we had like a very hip director directing a video, and we had a very cool writer writing the story. And wouldn't it be great to toggle between a chapter and a video and a chapter and a video? And it all came out looking super slick and super cool, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody wants to read a book and watch a video, have a video interrupt it, at least the way that I did it. And that was about 2 years ago, and I thought, I really overstepped, not just what I'm doing as a publisher, but what the audience was ready for and what they wanted.
But maybe it'll lead to some Hollywood people showing movies and you having people read books during the movie screen. That could be
That's a great idea.
There's probably VC money for that.
All right, so our key takeaway still remains add Merlot, I think.
Works for me.
And since you came up with that, Bob, I want to go back to you just on one of your recent experiments that I'm aware of. I know that through the Algonquin division, you've been working with first Barnes & Noble, and I think now this month other retailers trying to test the market for the idea that consumers might have interest in a bundle between a print book and an ebook, either as a low-priced upgrade, I think in the Algonquin backlist promotion, or that they might want both iterations of the same work with the new Hillary Jordan book. So I'm wondering if you can give us anything that you've seen so far about how that's working and anything it tells you about what customers might or might not want right now.
Well, I've been obsessed for a couple of years about, is there a third way other than forcing consumers to choose between digital and physical, and having that be a battleground to actually use digital to sell physical and vice versa. Unfortunately, there's only one account currently set up to attach digital and physical sales, which is Barnes & Noble with the Nook. They can attach a digital free digital download or an upsell of some sort to a physical purchase at the cash register onto the Nook. Independent bookstores have not set this up yet. Amazon hasn't set it up yet. I mean, they're the only account I know about that has this ability. So unfortunately, there hasn't. I keep wanting to try stuff with this, but and we'll continue to try. But the environment isn't really there to give a test. I mean, we did do a test with Algonquin backlist books at Barnes & Noble that was very good for us, because it was a month in which Algonquin backlist paperbacks had their own table, and if you could either buy them just on their own physically, which gave more prominence to those titles, which was already a good thing, or you could buy other backlist titles as those, for $3 more with those physical titles. And we did see a lift in those sales, and we did see a lift in the physical sales. So, but it was 1 month at one account, so the largest account, but still limited. With When She Woke, it's independent booksellers and Barnes & Noble doing it. But again, it's not the visibility of it is low because it's only being done. The account has to add a sticker to it, and it sends them to a one place to pick up their ebook. So a lot of booksellers have welcomed it because independent booksellers don't get to play in the digital sales space very often. So it's a nice way to show support for them because hardcover books are getting harder to sell. But it's not what I still dream it could be because it's really only, there's no great way to pull this off. We are doing it to continue with this experimentation. We're doing our first ever major app, which is for the revised edition of 1,000 Places to See Before You Die, which comes out in a couple weeks. Okay. And with that, the app will be $10 if you buy it out in the world, but if you buy the book, you get the app for free. So, and that works anywhere because we're providing a unique code. But there's no ideal form for this. But I really think that 5 or 10 years down the road, we've got to come up with ways to put these formats together.
So there's a unique code printed in each book, or the purchaser contacts you? How's that actually going to work?
I actually go house to house. See, it's very cumbersome at this stage.
You have the app it's in your pocket.
But you get to know your customers this way. You
Right.
get feedback.
And they give you Merlot, and everybody's happy.
The code is printed on the underside of a sticker on the cover of the books.
Right. Okay.
And I think that, just hearing that story, it goes back to it's almost like publishers' eyes are bigger than their stomachs. You know how you say that to kids when they take too much on their plates? I mean, we've all been talking about this idea for a long time, and it's amazing to realize you need the support of your retail partner to build systems that can put 2 things in a shopping cart, which Amazon will always look at you and say, yeah, that's on our roadmap, but it's not at the top yet. And so there are a number of things where you hear consumers or your colleagues or anybody say, oh, wouldn't this be a great idea? Yes, it would. And unfortunately, here are the 4 things that have to be built, supported, tested, and executed before we can get to something as simple as a print book, ebook bundle. That makes complete intuitive sense. And there are some very good and specific reasons why we haven't been able to offer that yet. And if you go through the list of the top 20 ideas, all of them have different tripwires that are just going to take us longer to sort through. But it requires this very interesting collaboration between publisher and distributor, publisher, and these partnerships and these agreements about how we're going to get these products into consumers' hands. That's different. Like Bob was saying earlier, it used to be you printed one format. It was understood. And it was very straightforward how we were going to reach consumers. That has been put in a bag, jumbled up, and thrown back on the table. And now we're trying to figure out how to eloquently get that out again. It's challenging.
It's also, one thing, going back to what Ana Maria was saying about having eyes that are too big or whatever. You forget how incredibly labor-intensive all this stuff is. I mean, if you're going to do an enhanced ebook, everybody thinks it's the easiest thing in the world. If you think about, I've got a book coming out next year by the former president of ABC News, and he writes about 10 major events. But if you do an enhanced ebook with that, because instantly you go, okay, great, let's get, Princess Diana's death, and let's get this, and let's get that. Finding the stuff, getting the permissions, getting, all of that stuff, at a certain point, you just go down in a swoon on the floor just thinking about the amount of work. And, I think that's one of the things that's going to hold publishers back because we're not extremely rich businesses. And so it's not like any of us, even the most successful ones, and a small literary house like FSG really is not up there. Yeah. But, it really requires a lot of just people hours. So that's one of the things that's also, besides money, is it's just sometimes really hard to pull off with the people you've got.
And in a similar vein, Ana Maria, HarperCollins recently became, I think, the first major publisher to agree to make essentially the bulk of its trade paperback backlist available for printing through the Espresso on-demand printing machines that are now in about 24 independent bookstores. Is that, but associated with that is sort of also opening the door to a vendor-managed inventory program with those stores. I'm wondering where that fits in this spectrum. Is that a bet that the idea of moving towards virtual inventory is something that's really going to happen? Is it sort of, as Bob said, expressing support for something that a small number of independents are trying now to make it work better for them, to see where it goes? Is it really about getting to vendor-managed inventory and it happens to work with the system? Where can you put it in perspective?
You know, I'm not directly involved in that effort, but I think it is firing a bullet, you know, and sort of trying to support and trying to push and trying to move in a different direction and seeing what happens and seeing what the result of that is. I think that as publishers, we have to try to be wherever our readers are, and now they are in so many different places, and I imagine that effort is a lot about making sure that whenever anybody wants a print book, they can get it, and that this is one way to address that.
I think it also sort of goes to the idea of what's going to make it possible for a physical store to survive
I think so too.
in the world that we see going forward. And Sarah, I thought I'd start with you, since, as you've expressed, you're running a very traditional literary-minded imprint, where I would think in particular for your list that network of hand sellers and places where real readers aggregate and come together and talk to each other and look at shelves is particularly critical to your list. So how do you view and think about dealing with what's clearly a reduction in real store shelf space and real booksellers managing those?
I think of all the challenges, that's the scariest one for us, because it's not just my imprint, but for Farrar, Straus and Giroux, which is small, literary, a lot of poetry, a lot of the books that we sell really don't sell a lot of copies, but they sell to an ardent audience, and we're extremely proud of them, and it's definitely what we believe in. It's the kind of publishing we want to continue doing. So the fact that, when clearly a lot of stores are very, very wobbly, and it's not just the loss of independence. I mean, the loss of Borders for us was heartbreaking. We need, if people don't see our books, they don't know that they exist. If they don't pick them up and sort of hold them and touch them, and if they don't have that word of mouth, and it's not just sort of the poetry, it's mysteries. The mystery bookstores. I do a number of mysteries that I love doing them, but those bookstores, that's all word of mouth. That's all these groups. And actually the mystery bookstores are doing a very interesting job of figuring out ways to expand their business and get into, just to stay alive, doing first printing clubs and, the best bookstores are being extremely imaginative, being very creative, trying to figure it out. But, there's one other part too, which is that even for a small house like ours, even though, only about this year, only about 15% of our sales, I don't mean revenue, but the number of books that we sold, the units sold, were ebooks. But those were really only about 5 or 10 of the top books. Below that, unlike a lot of houses, there are some that were just almost zilch. But I'm not going to get into the whole, it's sort of too complicated to explain what this means to our bottom line. But more and more, a lot of our books are just going to get more and more expensive to print, which means we're going to be also, it's not just the bookstores, the loss of bookstores is going to affect us, but some of our books are suddenly, you're going to start seeing books that are like $35, $40. And That's terrifying too. It's all sort of lumped into the same area, I think. But that's what's makes me nervous.
Well, even, I mean, at Workman, where most of what's been successful over the years has been started modestly and then grown over time, whether it's on the Workman backlist or Algonquin's first novels that have been built. I mean, it's that same need to see things physically. Actually, one thing we've done to address the shrinking shelf space is give bookstores additional shelving, which sounds odd, but we thought, well, how can we address this? So we came up with this, it's called the square deal, and we actually gave them little square tables. And if they take these tables that we pay for, we supply these tables once a month with different groups of books. So it's actually giving them an additional shelf. So maybe there's something to that.
And Brian, how does the shelf space conundrum look from your side? I mean, Sarah was mentioning mysteries, and you obviously have a lot of mysteries and thrillers on your list as well as other books. Do you guys have any better idea of how to attack the browsable discoverability issue as all these live showrooms get increasingly pressured?
Well, it certainly changed, and I don't know about if we have better ideas, but our major concern certainly is the retail environment. I mean, we used to do a great job, all of us used to do a great job of selling into the accounts and getting into these great promotions in the bookstores, which then got to the readers. And for a lot of my authors who can write a book a year, who are almost branded authors, it was almost more important for me to make sure those books were stacked high and in front of the bookstores than anything else. And that's how these would get, the sales that they would get. Now you can't count on that at all, really, and that's changed a lot for us. But not surprisingly, I think that even the more commercial books, less the literary novels, less the illustrated books, but even the commercial books, we are trying to make them more like objects. We're putting more money into the covers. We're putting more money into maps and end papers and things that we can make that can make the book distinctive even over an ebook in some ways.
So that's the enhanced book.
Right. Right, because we feel, as one of my authors said to me a year or so ago, he said, if the printed book goes away, what are people going to decorate their houses with? And I said,
Bob's going to give them a shelf.
Right. And I think what we can do is continue to make the book actually something that they want. It's funny, the two courses that I've taught at NYU, I always start the course off with a question to the kids about what they read. Do they read on e-readers or do they read on books? In the two courses that I've taught, 80% of the kids read books, don't read off of e-readers.
But now that they're getting so cheap, don't you think that's going to change pretty rapidly?
I would have thought, and I do think it is, and certainly we have a big ebook business. Our business is a lot more than 15% of it. But I still think that a generation is still growing up, having grown up on books, and still wants books, and we have to kind of make books, the objects that they are, and not give up on them.
My 12-year-old daughter reads on a Kindle, actually, and several of her classmates read on a Kindle, and my 15-and-a-half-year-old says, I prefer print. I'm like, all right, whatever, you'll come around eventually. But I mean, it's almost like that is literally the dividing line. I think you get up
That's
into
interesting,
15, 16, and they're still going both ways, or maybe even preferring print, but I've started to notice, 10 and lower, they're perfect. I can't tell you how many 10-year-olds I knew last Christmas who asked for an e-reader for Christmas.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And are any of you seeing the known diminishment of live shelf space affecting either your acquisitions or how you think about positioning the books that you want to acquire? I mean, are you thinking more in terms of can SEO and a web page communicate the message of this title in a way that's sufficient to persuade somebody that they should be interested in it, or is that more something you're going to pick up the pieces on later?
Well, I mean, it's affected me a lot. Particularly, it's a little bit not just the shelf space. One of the things that we've also seen in the last couple of years that's also quite related is sort of the disappearance of a lot of magazines, a lot of newspapers, and particularly for review-driven books, which is what I do, the drop-off in my ability to get the word out about certain books has really been seriously affected in the last couple of years. And if you couple that with the disappearance of bookstores in many communities, I really have to figure out how I'm going to get the word out about my book and where the audience is. And sometimes I will read a novel or there'll be a nonfiction proposal, and sometimes I'll read a proposal and I just don't know who the audience is, and so I have no business in signing that up. But there are books where I do see who the audience is. I do sense, but I don't really know right now how to reach that audience. And, perhaps further down the road when either we have a better ability to online reach those audiences, and some publishers feel that they've got a good handle on that, and others don't feel like they have as good a handle on it, and it does require money, and so I have been walking away from projects that I really thought were valuable and interesting, but I also knew that I couldn't publish them well.
But this was always the challenge. I mean, there are the two tragedies in the business are, one, having something fantastic and no way to tell anybody about it, or having a project where you have lots of ways to tell people about it and it's terrible. Not that I've ever published a bad book by a celebrity, but obviously the goal is always something of value and a way to tell people about it. So the value has to be where it starts, but you need to also have a way to tell people about it. Now there are new ways to tell people about things. If someone has 1 million Twitter followers or 1 million friends on Facebook, that is exciting to know. But if what you're going to tell these followers about isn't something they want, then it's the second kind of tragedy. So there are new tools in the toolbox, but the issue is still the same, I think.
So to move from tragedy to irony, perhaps, one thing we've seen as physical shelf space declines is that, in fact, physical sales of books are gravitating increasingly online, as well as ebooks, which are obviously primarily an online-only product. And in both of those fields, a lot of the market share is gravitating towards Amazon.com. And now Amazon is at least dipping their toe into publishing as well. We're all aware of that article from last Monday. I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts to share about the article or the larger subtext of the article, which is that everything is about Amazon now.
And what else is there? I think it's a hot button, so it's fun to talk about on the one hand. On the other hand, as Sarah said, I think William Caxton, had a printing press, so he also published. And Ben Franklin had a printing press, so he also published. So this idea of everybody being in the pool is not really revolutionary. I think Roxanne Cody from R.J. Julius said, the pie is the same size, but there are a lot more forks. So there are more people doing publishing, and some of them have a distribution platform that's very powerful. But I guess I take some reassurance from a couple things. One is there have been pretty steadily 1 billion units sold in trade publishing over the past few years, roughly. So out of those 1 billion units, how many will Barnes & Noble's proprietary publishing and Amazon's proprietary publishing take over? 10 million each? 100 million each? That's a lot of books, 100 million each. If it's 100 million units each, we still have 800 million units for the rest of us to fight over. So that's still something to do. And the good books are still going to find their way. And that leads to me to the second part of consolation, which is, as publishers, if we're neutral and can publish anywhere, we don't have the platform to own, but we do have the ability and the basic urge to make sure we get a book everywhere it could possibly be, whether it's a gas station or an online account or an independent or a book. And to me, that really goes to the heart of what it means to publish. You are the champion of that book, high and low, hither and yon. It's not just you're doing a certain thing in a certain platform for a certain locked-in reader on a certain day. So that's where the hope lies for me.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think some people don't realize, when you were to read that article, it forgets this vast sort of distribution that's out there and where books are sold and where, that Amazon doesn't control. And and that in fact, they can't sign up certain authors because some of those authors really do need to be distributed in Costco and in Walmart and in gas stations and supermarkets and everything else. And so, the article kind of hinted that any day now, every major author was going to bolt and just sort of become an Amazon author and cut publishers out or cut, and it's more complicated than that.
And as evidence of that complication, Brian, part of the article tried to paint the idea that certain of your colleagues at Penguin Group were ballistic over self-publishing through Amazon, although the article overlooked the fact that Penguin Group is a partner of Amazon's in publishing newly discovered novelists through their contest over the last 3 years.
Right.
Have any of those flowed through Dutton? Have you had experience with those?
We have the next one.
Okay. It's a perfect setup for you
That's
then.
right. And it is funny. I mean, we partner with Amazon. We have a partnership with them for the last 5 years to discover a new writer. And it's a contest, and Dutton will be publishing the next book. It's called East of Denver in the spring of next year. And it's one of I think we've published about 5 of them, one a year for the last 5 years or so. And so, that is a big part of what our mission is, obviously, to discover new writers. And Amazon has, been a partner in that with us and with other programs as well. So it isn't anything new, really. It's something that we've all been looking to do and have worked together to do for quite some time now.
I think part of what it points to is that increasingly the lines are blurring among roles of everyone in the business that we call publishing. Technology has certainly enhanced the ability, more or less, for anyone to be a publisher. Retailers are offering publishing programs. Publishers and distributors are helping agents and authors distribute directly and eliminate certain publishing services. Penguin has Book Country, which is experimenting with giving more direct market access and resources to authors. Harper's had Autonomy and other of your projects going for a while. Do you think, do the lines just keep blurring? Does everyone become some form of basket of pick your choice service provider, and we can give you a check, or you can give us a check, or you can use this department, or you can use everything? Or do you think we're seeing a period where lots of people are figuring out what their role is in the chain, and then are going to work their way back to, here's what we do at our company, this is how it works. If you want to partner with us, great. If not, there's lots of other people who can distribute your backlist without giving you publishing services or help you to get discovered or perform other functions. Ana Maria, do you want to try this one?
Well, I think it's a little early to tell, but I would suggest that we would be wise to experiment and find out what we're good at and limit our efforts to that. I think to try to be everything to everyone is going to be very, very challenging. I mean, but I think it's too early to tell. I think that's part of what we're all trying to figure out. And I think that part of what happens when you get up in the morning and you see a front page article in the Times about Amazon participating as publishers, yes, of course, we all know this has been happening forever. But I think it wouldn't be completely honest not to say that does stick in the back of your brain, and you do look at your daily events and it influences it. So I think we're all we all do get up and grab our phones and read, and every morning we see something that someone else has announced prior to us or is executing a little bit prior to us. Again, it's very unlikely that it's an idea that we've never thought of, but it's something that someone has announced 10 minutes ahead of us. And there is a certain nervousness about that. Should we have been first? Is there, where is the first mover advantage? All of that stuff is playing into our brains when we read the next submission, when we think about, how to best publish that title. I think it's affecting all of us. So I think it's good to resist. I think a great strength nowadays is to resist the need to be first, to be everything, to, you know, to dilute your talents, and to what Sarah said, you know, do what you're best at. But I think it's growing challenging to stick to that, right? It's very
Yeah,
distracting.
and, you know, if you look at the Amazon's bestseller list right now, I think 8 of the 10 are pre-ordered books. Amazon has just changed, you know, they've been very, very smart about taking consumers in all sorts of ways and changing the way they think
It's very
about
true.
books. And, you know, the concept that you would pre-order a book, which totally cuts out, you know, those bookstores, you know, people don't think that they have to show up to get it.
That's right.
And, but also that affects the kind of publicity you do, when you run the
Yes.
publicity. You know, it's the Steve Jobs book, Walter Isaacson's book being #1, you know, the timing therefore of when that 60 minutes, and boy, for the people who saw the 60 minutes, to have the iPad can
I know, showing
help
it, you know.
autistic people talk in the second half of 60 minutes, like, whoa, who paid who for that? I mean, that's unbelievable. But, you know, it's affecting stuff in ways that we're not even aware that we're changing, but we're realizing, you know, we have to get things out in a different way because you want to hit those pre-ordered slots because then you're not going to get on the bestseller list. It's interesting. There are many facets to the prism, and sometimes we don't even realize that you know, one has been carved.
But having the platform doesn't guarantee success any more than not having the platform guarantees failure. I mean, if you have a great book, all of these platforms are going to want to sell it in addition to what they're doing in a proprietary publishing arm.
Right.
Because that's a big part of their business.
Right.
And if you have a platform and you're doing proprietary publishing, you can publish a book that nobody wants. You can make it very apparent, which helps give it its fair day. But Barnes & Noble, I think when they first were becoming aggressive in self-publishing, what was the name of that novel? There was a very big
What was it?
push.
What was it?
Winters of the Storm, Storm of the Summer,
Oh.
Summer of the Winter.
Yeah.
What was that? Anyway, it was an enormous, there were full-page ads in the New York Times. It was an enormous push.
Right.
And it was like, oh, wow, here we go. Barnes & Noble is publishing their own novel. Now it's all over.
Well, actually,
And the book didn't succeed.
wait, is this the one that the 2 Scandinavian guys?
I don't
'Cause
remember
they did it. It
Scandinavian
was like a
guys
front
involved.
page, and I had done the book before. It was like this pitiful, you know, I sold like 5,000 copies, and then they have these huge ads, and it was a huge success. And sorry, I'm get caught up in my own failures. But,
That's fine. You've anticipated the question you were going to get later. So always publish the second book by those 2 Scandinavian guys.
You were early on the Scandinavians, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're ahead of your time.
I was.
Another one of those early, late, everything old is new again things seems to be short form content these days, which was tried over and over again, failed miserably over and over again. But now that there are a couple curated stores that are sort of being carefully cultivated, at least has the appearance of traction. Sarah, I'm wondering your take in particular, since part of what seems to be working, in fact, is medium to short form works by journalists, some of whom would ordinarily seem to sort of fit in your stable of writers, whether it's some of the byliner folks or like my friend Ted Conover or other people who are finding that work at the length at which they were naturally producing it, for which a commercial market didn't exist,
Right.
now has some form of commercial and promotional apparatus behind it. Do you think this accommodates a lot of material, or is it by necessity a sort of a small curiosity?
I think there are 2 quite different answers to that question. I think on the one hand, it's extremely exciting, if you're talking about, especially with nonfiction, but also with fiction, with everything. We are now, what is exciting is that it used to be, back when I was at Little Brand years ago, I tried to do some of that publishing. Physically in the bookstores, you couldn't do those little things because they would get lost. There wasn't any place to put them on the shelf. Now, especially with the greater flexibility is going to be a boon to readers and to writers and to publishers. It's very, very exciting. Because it's also exciting because, frankly, not everybody, both you were saying, not everything needed to be too long. We all have the experience of picking up books that were just, there were like 65 great pages, and then it was just like, blah, 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 blah. And it was just there to fill it so you could slap a price on it. And, this is really great. On the other hand, I think one of the things that concerns me the most right at the moment is, coming out of news magazines as I do, having done a lot of serious nonfiction, I think one of the areas that people aren't talking about or thinking about enough is what's happening in that area. If you look at when the Bush presidency, which lied about everything. There wasn't a single bit of truthfulness in that whole administration.
No,
Why we entered Iraq, why, okay. There were a few little, there was definitely stuff that needed to be uncovered. And there was fantastic and important nonfiction book, which were mostly written by journalists that came out of news organizations, so that their funding came from the Washington Post or the LA Times, the New York Times, the New Yorker. But then publishers supplemented that, and you had really an important many shelves of very important books that uncovered a lot of serious issues. What you're having now, a lot of, first of all, because a lot of those news organizations have shrunken or disappeared, you have fewer places that are funding that serious reporting to begin with. Publishers don't have quite as much money to throw around in those areas, and I just think we're really, but this is a very long-winded way of saying, what you're also seeing is a lot of journalists who are doing littler books where I think it's too bad that that stuff isn't being expanded into deeper reporting. And I said in the profile, for instance, of Jill Abramson in the New Yorker this week, the Times is seriously looking at getting their reporters to do quick little e-books. I know this is true at the Washington Post. A lot of news organizations are thinking that this is what their reporters ought to be doing, which I think is going to be exciting and good in some respects, but is also going to, there may be a real loss in that.
And is there room in that market for your type of publishing? Can you fund a 20,000 word work and then see if it needs to be expanded and bring to it the same energy that you would bring to a full-length regular book that can also be printed?
Oh, yeah, definitely, I think so. I mean, I haven't done any at that length yet, but I mean, I edited Ishmael Beah's A Long Way Gone, and part of the success of that book, and I was very, very grateful, that manuscript when I first got it was 600 pages. And Ishmael and I worked incredibly hard to get it down to size. And the reason we did was the head of academic sales at Macmillan, which is the parent company, said, I hear you've got this terrific book, but it's got to be really, really short. And I said, I can't make this so short. And he said, no, it has to be short because the schools, it won't get into school libraries and the schools won't sign it up. And it's not because of short attention. I thought at first, oh, this is, short attention spans. It's, and it wasn't that. It's because in the curriculum, you don't want a book about a memoir by a child soldier that takes 3 months to read. You want to get it over with in 1 week, 2 weeks. And I think a lot of this kind of stuff that you're talking about is going to have a real life in universities, high schools, and they're going to need really good editing and publishing to get it out there.
Well, it's true that it's providing opportunities for journalists. I was talking to an agent last week who, one of their authors, their magazine article about the women gone missing in a town in Mexico had been killed at the New York Times Magazine. So they got their $2,000 kill fee, and then they had this article. What do you do with it? It used to be nothing.
Well, that's the Atticus model.
Yeah, but now, so this person just put up their article that they'd already written and gotten paid for, but it wasn't going to be published, up as a Kindle single, and they've already made $15,000 in just direct sales. So it's a great way to use, get material out there. It's not something we're going to do at Workman, though, because back to Ana Maria's point about resources. We have 200 people focusing on 100 new books a year. And at least so far, the idea of adding on top of that some ebook originals, it would be going beyond the number that we think we can do well, because those books take all the same kind of attention that any other book takes, except perhaps with just someone not printing it. So that's one function among 200. So
the flip side of that market, and maybe you can take this part, Brian, is I've noticed recently, as we've seen some life for that, both the short form market but also the inexpensive ebook market, now we're seeing a lot of the big name standard fiction authors coming in with mini collections and novellas at the $199 to $299, $399 price tag. So Stephen King has his 80-page work out in advance of his big fall release, and Michael Connelly's got three stories in advance of his full-length novel. Which on the one hand seems great because there's a built-in audience for these people, and I guess it's generating some revenue, and maybe it's, at least as executed now, promotional for the larger work. You can also see how it quickly eats up bestseller list slots with the $299 version of Michael Connelly and Stephen King and all the other authors who would like to occupy that with their $12.99 and up ebooks. Have you been doing this with some of your fiction authors, and do you see it as commerce? Is it promotion?
Yeah, I think the best way to look at it is to use this for promoting your author and promoting the author's works, not so much as an end in itself, but as a means to something else. And that's the way that I look at it. The singles or the e-specials or the short form thing, essays, we've used, and I always look to use, but I rarely look to use it just to sell, a couple thousand or tens of thousand copies of just that. I want it to do something more. Like Lee Child this year for for Random House wrote a short story about 3 months before his novel was coming out, and the short story had something to do with the novel. Didn't have everything to do with the novel. You didn't have to read it, but it had something to do with it. And they really promoted it well. And the novel, when it came out, had a huge buzz around it, and it, landed at number one. And the pre-orders went way up. And I bet you they're sitting there thinking this was a great promotion because it really helped serve the book, the full-price book. Not so much that they sold hundreds of thousands of the short form, short story that he wrote. And that's the way. I had an author, a nonfiction writer, an economist who had last book just didn't work. And so we had one more book under contract with him, and we were sitting there thinking, how are we going to get people to pay attention to this guy? Because everyone's going to look up the track record and say, his last book didn't work, why are we going to pay attention to him now? We had him write a 15,000-word essay about a very topical subject in economics. We published it last year. David Brooks wrote about it, wrote an op-ed about it, got onto the ebook bestseller list in the New York Times. We sold tens of thousands of copies of it. And all this in Business Week called him the most interesting economist of the year, right? So we've been able to right that ship that we've never been able to do before based on this kind of e-special that we did. And these are the things that I think as publishers you're looking to do. You're not looking to flood the market with these low-priced short stories and things. You're looking to build the careers of your authors, and these are great tools to do that.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to get to audience questions in a minute, but Andrea promised you were all going to talk about some of your biggest mistakes, and only 2 of you have owned up to it so far. So Ana Maria, have you come prepared with an educational or just embarrassing mistake to share?
Well, I thought about that, and my biggest mistakes fall into the same category. I seem to make the mistake over and over again, which is underestimating the time that it takes for people to sort of adjust to something new, and then underestimating the time once they sample it and like it, that they move and adapt it. And I think so much of what we're talking about has to do with timing, and I think if you show or you tell somebody something 3 times, they should get it and appreciate it and love it by then, but in fact, you probably have to tell them 15 more times before you can get them to sample it. But then I'm also continually surprised once they sample it, and if you've done a good job and they like it, how quickly they'll take it and run with it and be incredibly impatient because you've not provided more of it. So that's interesting to me, and I wouldn't have thought about that until my train ride today when I was thinking about my biggest mistake.
And Bob, would you like to finish us with mistakes?
You know, when we were doing Harper Studio, which was a profit share model, we said in public, and therefore we will only pay advances up to $100,000. And I would advise future startups, don't announce your maximum. There's nothing, you know, you go say, how about $60,000? They go, you know that 100 I read about? That would be better. So don't do that. I wouldn't do that again.
That's funny.
You should have said very nice deals only. You wouldn't have been locked in. I tried to anticipate this for you. Are there folks in the audience who have questions ready to fire? Just raise your hands, or are you do we have a mic for them? All right, while people are gathering their thoughts, I'll give you guys one more, which is, as Andrew said at the beginning, you're all here because you're all teaching. So I'm wondering, and it's a two-part question, you can take whichever part you like. I'm wondering either, what is it you have to teach? What is it that you have to teach people today? What distills down to being one of the most important things you can share? Or inversely, if you don't have a good answer for that, what's the most interesting thing you're finding you're getting back from your students as you're exposed to what they're bringing to our field?
Well, for me, I mean, I remember coming into publishing just from that pure editorial background and thinking I would edit poetry and that kind of a very, rarefied view that, and the people in the class I've been teaching also come to it from a great love of reading, but they have a much more sophistication than I had when I started about knowing what the business really consists of, knowing what the issues are of the day, knowing what all the different questions about technology are, and being aware of all the other moving parts in terms of marketing, publicity, and sales. I mean, I came from it purely academically and as a reader, and they are that as well, but they have a lot more sophistication in the other pieces that they're going to need.
Anybody else want to take a crack? Ana Maria?
It's hard to teach well, to do a good job at it, and I've been humbled in that effort. I really enjoy it, but I've never done it before, and it's hard. And I'm glad for the opportunity, and I've learned a lot, but a lot goes into it.
I think the thing that I get most out of it is that it's the one part of the week when I'm meant not to be cynical about them. And I kind of gear up for that, and it's kind of great to be reminded that we're in the optimism business. I mean, as I said, most of the books you buy will not work. I mean, if you kind of let that get to you, you're just going to stop trying to make them work. And, on here we have a lot of long careers and very distinguished careers of people who, have had great successes. And they've built a lot of those, I would guess, on a number of failures that they didn't let get to them. And I think when you go into the class and you see all these very smart students, who want a career in the career that you're having, it's really invigorating. And it just reminds you why you're doing it, and not to let all the other stuff, kind of dampen the enthusiasm. That is a major part of what we have to do every day.
All right, so with that praise, you guys have to have questions ready. and we now have a microphone ready for you.
Hi, Michael. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the panel. It's great. I'm Peter. Okay, I'm Peter Costanzo. I teach the Introduction to Interactive Media course here at NYU, and I get the same feeling every week. I love coming here and teaching the course. But one of the things that I talk to my students about, and I think that this has really been touched on here, and you opened up with it, Michael, is we've got a lot of these very exciting new things happening. We see the Atavis, which was mentioned, and we get companies like Atomic Antelope that come out of nowhere, and they do the Alice for iPad. And there's a lot of chatter about that, and of course Amazon getting involved now in publishing, even though they've been involved for a while now. The thing is, what I keep trying to point out is that we got to keep a close eye on these ventures, because when Seth Godin a year ago announces, hey, I'm done with traditional publishers, I'm moving on, has anyone checked lately what's going on with Seth Godin? How's he doing on his own? It's a year later, how's he really making out? These are the questions we need to ask. Atomic Antelope, they had this great idea. What was their next idea? It was Alice goes to New York. And then they were like, Alice goes with Lewis and Clark on an adventure. They had like one idea.
No, they got bought up by
Well-
a company in
well, that
Seattle,
was-
and then Random bought them.
Well,
So
that was
they're
actually
doing okay.
Smashing
Yeah, but
Ideas.
the Smashing Ideas bought them, and
Right.
then Smashing Ideas.
Right,
was
but
sold to
what I mean
them.
is they had one idea and people jumped on it and got excited. It's the sustainability of these new ideas that I think is really challenging for folks. And they don't realize what we talked about is just everything that goes into doing what we do for a living. So I'm really making more of a statement than a question. I'm saying that I think what we've seen here is that there's a lot that goes into running a publishing company, and everyone in this room is the future of it and is going to contribute to, either starting your own Atavist and doing something really super cool, or you're going to become part of a major publishing company and contribute to the efforts that we've talked about today. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that kind of
Shoot.
outlook, but.
This is Merlot to all of you, right?
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
Cheers to all of you.
Well, and the point that I'd make as a follow-on, Seth is doing well, but all his sales are through Amazon, so it's dark data. And I think with a lot of these new startups, because it's my job to keep asking them and having them tell me, oh, we're doing great. Well, how great? Well, I'm not allowed to tell you how great. Publishers are still standing out there as the ones who actually are able to talk about their success in very particular ways. And I keep trying to encourage publishers, when I talk to them, to celebrate those successes very particularly and not slip into this dark data world where it's just euphemisms. Because I think 99 times out of 10, the story that a publisher has to tell about their very real success with very real numbers is very convincing. I wish Simon & Schuster were out there telling us how many Walter Isaacson, Steve Jobs biographies they moved the first day, because I think it's a very powerful statement, and I don't think a startup can do that, and I don't think a web-only company can do that. I think we all know how hard it is to bring to market a book like that with that kind of extraordinary success. And so every time the industry hides behind, it's doing great, I think it's not telling the story well, which is there are still things here that established companies with experts who've done this for 20, 30 years can do very well and probably do better than anyone else. And I think people should be out in front about that when it happens.
Yeah, I think, going back to the Amazon article in the Times last week, somebody said in there, well, there's always going to be a need for the curatorial, job that publishers do. And yeah, there is. The truth is that, Amazon with their publishing efforts, they're hiring editors, but it's very unclear exactly how that all works. But whatever format books appear in, if you're asking somebody to pay money for it, whether it's $1.99 or $35, you are really, saying to the person, if you put your money there, I'm going to give you something that's valuable and that is going to make your life richer in one way or another, whether it's going to just entertain you or it's going to, expand your brain in a way that is exciting. And what I've been saying to my students is that, yes, a lot of these things are going to change. The world that I'm talking about in the classroom is going to be totally different or a lot different 5-10 years from now when they're sort of moving up if they go into publishing. But those, going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, those key skills of knowing what to do, the key skills of, it takes a lot of people to help an author realize his or her dream, whether it's in editing it, in making it pretty on the page, getting it out to an audience. It really takes a really big team. And one of the things that I love about publishing is that it's always, hey kids, let's put on a show. It's always this sort of collective thing, which, and it falls apart if you don't have all those people involved. And that's going to continue whatever format we're in, or whatever, you know, whether you're in a brick store or you're in, you know, in the what do we used to call it, the World Wide Web, you know. That's what's so much fun to teach, and it's why we all still are in the business too, I think.
I do think, though, when you're talking about skills, that one thing that really has changed is that everyone in every department, or any interested in working in every department, has to really understand every other skill.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
you can no longer have the luxury of being the editor in the ivory tower, and then it goes down the assembly line, and you don't need to know the messiness of sales. I mean, I think it's all too integrated, and the skills and it's all too challenging for everyone in every area. Needs to really have a deep understanding of every other area. That's changed since we started.
All right, if we don't have at least one student question, you guys are all getting homework tonight. Okay.
Hi, I'm Zachary Cader. I'm a student in the publishing program. In fact, I'm in Bob's class. I'm wondering, with Amazon, I know they announced a new pricing about a month ago now. And obviously we want them to succeed, but their pricing is cutting out other e-readers at this point. Are you guys doing anything, or are your companies doing anything to help other e-readers survive the price cut that Amazon's doing on them?
Well, you'll see some devices that are responding to that price point. I mean, you saw Kobo's device is responding, and I think B&N has something that you'll see soon. So I mean, we can't really help device manufacturers with their pricing, but they're responding.
But were you talking about the price of the e-reader or the price of books?
Well, I was talking, obviously, Amazon's main goal is to price their e-reader, but the price of the books you're supplying to the other e-readers, or combination packages or stuff like that.
I mean, because there's two different. There's the hardware, which is obviously the less expensive it is, the more people will own them, and then hopefully the more books they will buy. There's a positive there. In terms of the down pricing of titles, the biggest 6 houses are working on an agency model that gives them some control of pricing. So those are two answers. I'm not sure if that's what you're driving at. But also the hopeful thing about the pie is shrinking if we just sell the same billion units but at lower prices. The hope there is that it's the next mass market revolution, and actually we're selling more than twice as many copies at half of the price, which would just increase readership while making the same amount of money. That would be okay.
I think if we can bring the mic up front, we had some others up here. Yeah.
My name is Meredith Dewey, and I'm also a student in the publishing program. My question is related to books as apps. I'm interested in book apps mainly for children, but I'm wondering, Bob, you mentioned your 1,000 Places to See Before You Die app. What have you learned from your experiments in the app space?
Well, that's our first, and it's coming out in 2 weeks, so I'll let you know.
We've learned that it's very difficult to do. It's not a core skill that publishers possess. I think we've been fairly fast learners, whether it's we've learned internally or we've learned how to bring people in to join us in the effort. I think it very much remains to be seen how it serves our overall goal of engaging more readers and bringing more readers to authors. I think it serves a slightly different purpose for authors, but how it serves that core goal, I think, remains to be seen from our perspective so far.
I think you're also going to see that market change very quickly, because up until recently, you had the App Store environment was the primary sales environment. Nook Color came along and made it possible for some children's books to exist with app-like functionality, but basically be provided as ebooks. Now with Fire and with Kobo's Vox and whatever's coming next from Nook, we're going to see more color devices and more stores that can sell things that are children's ebooks with features that don't necessarily have to be constructed as apps and programmed to play one way on iOS and another way on Android and another way on a different operating system. So I think the early experience is pretty non-indicative of what that market could be. But I do think what we've found so far is technological overkill hasn't served the market well so far.
Shaking the book, I'm not sure what that's doing for reading overall.
I think we had another question.
Hi, I'm AJ DeWard, another publishing student. I was wondering which companies and individuals you all are looking to as innovators, as we all read our Pub Lunch every day, we read our other industry newsletters, but who do you all have your eyes on as the next innovator?
This is a good question. Yeah.
Well,
I'm not going to tell Bob. I want it to be a secret.
well, mine was going to be you, but now I'm not. You know, I've been chasing Peter Costanzo around a lot recently because I'm interested in what F&W has done in the last couple of years in their ability to go beyond selling through traditional channels to having their own consumer-facing niche publishing online, which I think that, you know, that's something we all need to learn how to do, whether we do it to the extent they have or not. How to really get involved in communities of readers of all different types and get feedback from them and be participants with them in what we're publishing. I think that's a really interesting, what F&W has done there is worth looking at hard.
I love The Atavist. I love everything they do.
I spend most of my time looking at what authors do, you know, and trying to figure out what they're doing to cultivate their audience and their platforms, and either try and mimic those or try and convince them to come over and join me. But I think, you know, we can learn a lot from how they create their audiences and what they're doing.
And not to do a Debbie Downer thing, but going back to earlier conversations, you know, you do going forward, I both look and see what authors are doing and also see if there are ideas I can steal from them. But
Mimic.
But I had some mimic, absorb.
Pay homage.
But yeah, but I also have worked with certain authors where I realize that they're not good in doing that, and I start considering not moving forward with them because I need them to be part of the team. I can't do it as a publisher, and I think that's also part of the change, that in a way you're really becoming part of a team with an author, and some authors just don't have good people skills or aren't interested in that, and
Love
frankly,
the novel, JD, but if you're not going to get on Twitter, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm serious. It's you know, it's something you
That's so sad.
factor in.
It's sad but true.
You have another question?
Hi, I'm Tara Powers. I'm not part of the program, but I'm part of the Young to Publishing group, and I work at W.W. Norton. My question is kind of related to that bit about the author being part of the team, and a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with short form kind of changing the game with bestseller lists and things like that. With these new sort of electronic forms, whether they be ebook originals or short form, kind of propelling maybe more established authors onto those spots on the bestseller list, combined with authors who might not have good people or electronic skills, does it make it harder for newer authors or unestablished authors to make inroads with your houses or to kind of make cases for themselves if you don't think that they can survive in this sort of a market?
Yes.
Yeah. Also, you know, it's been talked about a lot, but because of all this stuff, you know, the bestseller list again and again is just filled with the big names. It's just harder to sort of break in there, and between the celebrities and the well-known, dug-in, well-established writers, is just really very hard. And you do.
But, yeah, I mean, discovery is something that we're we're talking about a lot. We can't exist if we're just relying on either increasing or maintaining our current author sales. I mean, we have to do a good job, and we have to discover authors year over year, and that is changing like everything else, and it's challenging. It's not impossible, but yeah, that's a big preoccupation. It has to be.
For us, it's not just electronic, but authors at Workman or Algonquin are toured relentlessly, which is something a lot of publishers have set aside. But so a willingness to be out there on the road and meet with booksellers and talk to authors, for long stretches of time. I mean, we ask that they not have families. We tour them till they drop.
Anybody else? Oh boy.
I just wanted to ask you, what inspired you to be a publisher amongst many occupations?
I love reading. I love authors. I think even more than I love reading, I love authors. They're still a very distinct breed, and I think I keep referring to them as our last sort of overexploited celebrity. I mean, if you think of it, seriously, it's only now that you're starting to see their faces on a routine basis, and as someone who makes a lot of enhanced ebooks and puts a lot of these people on the screen, that's a very interesting experience for them, and that's something entirely new in many cases. And I love authors.
I like the collaborative nature of the business and the kind of people that it tends to attract. And for me, I saw that when I visited someone, when I was still in college, I visited someone who worked in a publishing company. And I had kind of a falsely warm view because it was right before Christmas and they were gathered in an office and they were drinking Merlot and singing Christmas carols together. And it just seemed like such a warm family. And little did I realize. But no, that's still the most exciting thing when different minds come together in a room and make something. It's just out of thin air. It's amazing.
Yeah, I also, one of the things that, having started out in magazines, that was actually great training for me for books, because there you really realize that you don't exist unless you're involved in a dialogue with the reader. And it's quite exciting to put a magazine out and you can really feel that there are readers who are interacting with it. And then to move on to books and watch that happen. A lot of, some publishers make the mistake sometimes of really just sort of thinking about the books themselves or markets or this or that. But it's going after that human connection and watching it. And one of the things that I do miss, on the subway these days is you can't really see what anybody's reading because everybody's, reading on one device or another. And I don't mean it in terms of the business, but I just loved watching that, and you can see people engrossed in what they're reading. And
I was an English major in college, and I went to my professor at the end of college, and I said, "What am I supposed to do now?" And he said, "You can either be a lawyer, or you can go into publishing."
Good choice.
I said, "That's it."
You can go back home, live with your parents.
Exactly.
Hi, I'm Carrie. I'm a master's student. My question is kind of about the devaluation of books because of the ebook, the pricing trend with ebooks. And I think that there's sort of this perception that whatever's online should be free. So how are you guys countering that and sort of saying, my book is worth something, it's worth more than 99 cents?
it's a good question.
It's been surprising to many of us, the willingness for consumers to pay for quality material. I don't know that we've suffered from a huge perception of lack of value as it's gone from a print format to an electronic format. I do think that we've suffered from, why can't you give me a bundle? Why can't you deliver it to me without errors? That's not as easy as you would hope it to be. I think that we've suffered from other things that are counterintuitive, but I personally have been gratified to see that if somebody wants the new Jim Collins or the new whatever it is, and we present it to them in a variety of formats, they'll pick it up, and they haven't said, "Oh, I think that's crazy that it's electronic and it's now at this price point."
But the only caveat to that, I think, would be that the previous model of windowing from a higher price format to a year later a lower price format, and then a year later than that a lower price format than that, and then remaindering, that's the thing we're doing differently now. So the good news is more
think that's
readers
temporary.
buying more books at lower prices. As problems in the world go, that's a good problem. But it is happening at the same time as the much more
now.
expensive format. So that does threaten the more expensive format. I think, it's getting harder and harder to sell books at more than $25. They're at the same time selling for $12.
But who
Or trade
who
paperbacks.
can remember this? Because somebody was talking about this yesterday.
Well,
The
they're
Walter
closer.
Isaacson on Amazon, the ebook is almost identical. I think it was 80 cents higher or lower than the discounted print
Right.
book. That is the good news and the bad news, as Bob is saying. So, but it's very interesting how they've actually come together.
I think also, though, I might be wrong, but my impression is that that was more of an issue. I was reading that kind of chatter much more a couple of years ago of, you're not doing the printing, you're not doing the paper, you're not, so why are you charging this much? And I have a feeling that, I might be wrong and you may be reading.
No, we can see it in
this.
our sales. That's
I
true.
think people are making their peace with it more.
Yeah, people used to stop me in airports and complain, seriously, and complain about it, and they, knowing what I do, and they don't say that anymore. They don't say, I don't understand, why isn't it free? They say, why am I seeing typos? And then I have to talk about proprietary formats and Mobi and this and that.
I miss your plane.
I know.
Well, everybody, I think we all need to, a lot of you need to get back into the publishing jungle where Amazon is the big hunter encroaching and so forth. So a very warm thank you to our moderator, to our panelists for sharing their successes, their failures, a lot of passion and inspiration here today. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I can assure you at our next media talk, there'll be no more Diet Coke. There will be Merlot served on shelves, and we'll
Bet I got something.
keep you posted about the date. But thank you all for coming,
You got
and
it.
thanks again to our panel.